Hot chocolate, Azure Cosmos, Entity Framework, Power Tools, Technology Suite.
Countdown commencing. T-minus 2 minutes.
Jeremy Lickness.
Shiro Dance.
Grace Lanson.
Arthur Vickers.
.NET data. T-minus 1 minute. Thirty seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We are go for .NET Data Community Stand-Up.
Hello everyone, welcome to another .NET Data Community Stand-Up. As you can see, we have a lot of people joining us today. This is we're going to talk about WCF Core, or Core WCF, which is the port of Windows Communication Framework server-side to .NET Core. Something that I personally don't know very much about, so I'm really looking forward to hearing about this. Maybe we'll do let's do intros now. So many people, so maybe we just go around and let people introduce themselves. I mean, you know Jeremy and myself and Shai, but we also have, and I'll just go around the screen here. Like Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, it's Matt Connew. I'm the guy who started off CoreWCF as a little side project, and it's grown. And I mostly I guide the technical direction and do a reasonable amount of contribution to CoreWCF.
Cool. Mike?
Yeah, my name's Mike Rousos. I'm a software engineer on the .NET customer engagement team. So we're a customer-facing part of the engineering organization who will go out and work with customers to make sure they're able to get started with new .NET and Azure app development technologies. And as part of that, I've been partnering with Matt and Sam and Hong to make sure that customers are able to use CoreWCF as a way to modernize their applications that previously were on .NET Framework with WCF dependencies, and now they're bringing forward to run on .NET 6.
Cool. Sam?
I'm Sam Spencer. I'm a product manager. I always get confused because we changed up titles. My job is to kind of shepherd the project to release and work on customer development to figure out what we do going forward.
Cool. Hong?
My name is Hong. I'm engineer manager who work with Matt on CoreWCF and WCF Core. My team also owns several other .NET components, and we're here to talk about. I'm here to talk about CoreWCF roadmap.
Sounds good. And Heather?
Hi, I'm Heather Arbin, and yeah, I work with, I'm an engineering manager with Hong and Matt, and I'm here to hear about the community and about CoreWCF.
Excellent. So feel free to ask your questions. We'll try and get people to answer them in the chat, and also we will flag some and bring them up when we get an appropriate break in what we're talking about. So yeah, your questions are always welcome. Before we get on to WCF, let's do a quick State of the Union, as is the way we do things.
Unicorn.
Unicorn. I said union, didn't I? Oh wow.
You
That's
did.
bad.
You definitely did.
I don't know. Okay, so EF7 Preview 7 is on NuGet now. There's if you've been watching previous episodes of this, you'll know that we did a bunch of interceptors work in it, which we already kind of demoed here. The final bits of that is in Preview 7, and we have a blog post on the .NET blog, which goes through some of the same examples, slightly modified from what we showed in the community stand-up. So that's all good stuff. And then if you did see that community stand-up, one of the things that you may be interested in is that there's a GitHub repo on there now, which has these things. I can't get my mouse pointer to click it. Here we go. So there's a GitHub repo that has the code that I showed in the community stand-up as well. So if you want to go and play with that, then feel free to do so. Also in Preview 7, unidirectional many-to-many, configuring different facets, so names and things for any type of entity splitting. So TPT and TPC primarily, but then also if you're just doing manually splitting. We do translations of statistics aggregate functions on SQL Server. This is part of the custom aggregate translations, and I think Shai, you're going to do a whole stand-up on aggregates coming up soon, right?
I think so. In 2 weeks, we're gonna focus on. There's a lot of new aggregate support, and EF Core. It's not just those statistics aggregate functions. There's spatial stuff. There's string join, and there's some really wacky, impressive stuff happening for Postgres as well. So tune in 2 weeks.
Cool. You can do filtered include on hidden navigations. What this basically means is you can use the ef.property method in doing include calls now, which is was needed for unidirectional many-to-many, but can open up a few more kind of dynamic filtering scenarios there. And we've also made it easy for you not to get it wrong when you try and pass cancellation tokens to find async. And as Shai mentioned, string join and string concat. I think that was contributed by the community, right?
No, that's part of the aggregate work.
Okay, I thought that one particular one was, but maybe not. Okay. And then in the daily builds, we've now got the sequence-based key value generation on SQL Server. So this is important if you're using TPC, if you remember the TPC stand-up. So now you'll get that by default, and you can opt into it for other scenarios without having to define the lower level bits yourself. We've on Shai's request, he claims it was a customer, but I think it was really him. We've moved the context initialize event from info to debug. So if you don't see that anymore, that's by design. You can, as with any of our logging events, you can go and reconfigure it back to info if you want, or whatever you want to do with it, you can reconfigure it. But by default, we figured that was a little bit too much to put out on info level all the time. We have a static flag now. I can't remember, ef.isDesignTime or something like that, which we run when we're doing migrations or anything design time discovery. So if your code is, for example, starting doing automatic migrations, you can check this and not do it when the tool's running instead. And that's it for State of the Unicorn. So let us now turn it over to the WCF people. So Sam, I think you're going first.
Yeah, so we probably have to give a brief introduction. So CoreWCF is a project Matt started a couple of years ago to port the WCF server implementation over to Core. We released a 1.0 earlier this year. We have Microsoft support for it, which the wording is kind of all very legalese, but essentially it's If you find problems during production, we will get on that ASAP through CSS. We just did a 1.1 release, and we're now looking at what we do in 2.0. It's a community-led project. So although we're all here from Microsoft, we have contributors from around the world, including AWS, who are working on message queue functionality right now.
Awesome.
So in terms of a roadmap, Hong, do you want to present?
Sure, let me share.
Radio silence.
Just waiting for share thing to come up here.
It worked earlier.
So what she's sorting that out, I'm going to quickly respond to one of the comments which came in via YouTube saying about bringing back NetTCP support. And so CoreWCF does have NetTCP support.
Awesome.
Okay, so just like what Sam has talked about, CoreWCF project is community driven, and the feature we ship in CoreWCF is customer driven, and the CoreWCF release is feature driven. So if you Matt already talked about it, the feature. So if you want any features from us, please vote. There's an issue. It's pinned on top of the CoreWCF repo, and you can vote on the feature you would like to consider for the future release. And for the upcoming release, right now we plan to ship CoreWCF 2.0 at the end of this year, and which include the reliable session, pipe that Sam mentioned, MSM queue support as well, which is going to be implemented by AWS engineers. And also AWS engineer is also working on the performance improvement. Since NetTCP, one thing to call out CoreWCF 2.0, we updated dependency to .NET 6.0, .NET Core 6.0. And early next year, one of the highly voted feature, which is TCP port sharing, is going to come early next year. And the rest of them is listed on this slide. That's all I want to chat.
That's good. So if your feature isn't in these planned features, then go vote for it. I understand. And you're looking for people to contribute. So I assume there's some getting started stuff there that people can do. And I would always say, certainly when you're contributing to the EF stuff, contact the team before you do anything. It's much better to discuss what you're going to do rather than spending several weeks and sending out a PR and then they say, oh, well, we really don't want to do it that way. So go ahead.
We had great success. We had great success with that with the Web HTTP binding support. Some company contacted us and said, "Hey, do you want? Is there any plans to bring Web HTTP binding?" And I was like, "Well, it's kind of far down on roadmap because there is a workable solution, which is to move to Web API. Like, there's a whole bunch of work to move to it, but it's there. So, it's not a high priority because of that reason." And but if you want to contribute a PR to bring it over, we'll definitely accept it and support it ongoing. And so set up a meeting, had a call with them for them to work out feasibility of doing it. And we decided it was cheaper for them to port that feature than it was to change their services across. And so had multiple meetings with them, talking about architecture, giving them guidance and help. Unblocking them on questions where they're like, how do I do this? Or have you any ideas how to solve this problem? And we now have Web HTTP binding.
Communication is the key, no pun intended.
There's also a WCF community stand-up that happens once a month, right, Matt? Which is a good place to connect as well, beyond just going to the GitHub page and participating there.
Yeah. Awesome, good stuff. So I said before, if you've got questions for the team, ask them in the chat, and we'll get to them. Mike, did you have stuff you wanted to share next?
Yeah. Yeah, next I was going to talk a little bit about some of the upgrade tooling that we have and how it relates to WCF. So really the reason that we're talking about this in the context of CoreWCF is this kind of second to the last bullet down here, which is that our upgrade assistant tool, we're adding support for CoreWCF to it currently. That should be available soon. Over the next few months, we should be able to get that sort of finished up and out the door. And I've got a demo I can show you sort of the work in progress that we have so far. But
Awesome.
I wanted to give just a little bit of detail on the overall upgrade tooling landscape for .NET, because it's really been evolving and changing rapidly, and I want to make sure everyone's sort of up to date on what's happening there. So there is, of course, Upgrade Assistant, which I list in this third bullet, which has been around for a year or two now, which is a command line tool that sort of goes through the different steps that developers need to take to migrate from .NET Framework up to .NET 6. And so it'll walk you through interactively saying, okay, we're going to update your project file format to be an SDK style project. You say, okay, and it makes the change. Then it'll say, okay, now we're going to clean up your NuGet package references because we're using a package reference style format instead of NuGet.config. You say, okay, and it does that. And it goes through all of these changes, updating things like what target framework you're targeting, the versions of your dependencies you're using, C# source code, views in ASP.NET MVC apps, config changes, things like that. And so this is sort of the tool that we've had the longest for automating some of the lower hanging fruit when you're moving from .NET Framework to .NET 6. I do want to emphasize with all of these tools that upgrading to .NET 6 can be a lot of work. And it's not possible to have a tool that completely automates all of it. So with all of these things, they're sort of doing their best to remove the easy parts so that then the developer can focus just on the really interesting bits of the migration and not have to do the, oh, I have to change namespaces in like 50 different files, or I need to, update all of my projects to use this new format. That part will happen automatically. And so some of the stuff that's been changing in Upgrade Assistant, the one that's relevant for this conversation is, like I said, we are working on adding WCF to CoreWCF support, so that should be coming soon, and just keep an eye out on the repo, and we'll be putting updates there. Other features that have showed up recently, we now have the ability to port from Xamarin to Maui, and again, partially migrate, at least to help you with that process. We've also expanded the analysis capabilities of Upgrade Assistant so that now it can look at the binaries in your build output, and we'll look at the .NET dependencies that you have, like which .NET APIs you're using, and report on whether those are going to work on .NET 6 or not. This overlaps with our previous tool, the .NET Portability Analyzer. And the long-term plan is, once we've sort of demonstrated that Upgrade Assistant is able to handle that scenario well, it will replace the Portability Analyzer, or will sort of just consolidate with Upgrade Assistant being the one tool. Other stuff that's happening, though, in the upgrade space that's worth calling out just briefly is that we do have some new tooling. With Upgrade Assistant, all of the upgrades happen in place, and we've found, working with customers, that the tool works well for app models that don't have a lot of changes moving to .NET 6. So, for example, if you're upgrading a WinForms or a WPF app, Upgrade Assistant tends to work pretty well because those are straightforward changes. If you're doing a small to medium-sized class library, it works pretty well. For web scenarios specifically, though, we found that Upgrade Assistant is not as useful as we wanted it to be, because just the scope of changes moving from ASP.NET to ASP.NET Core is so large that it's usually a very large effort to make that migration, and it can be difficult for customers who need to have their app in a building deployable state to dedicate months to making all of these changes that are required to go from ASP.NET to ASP.NET Core. So we've got some new tooling that is meant to specifically address those web scenarios. We've got a Visual Studio extension that helps you incrementally migrate ASP.NET apps. And so if you haven't seen this yet, we announced Preview 1 earlier this year. We're up to Preview 3 now, which just released earlier this week. And this VS extension allows you to, inside of Visual Studio, right-click on an ASP.NET project, say you want to migrate it, and it will create a new ASP.NET Core project that sits alongside it. It configures the two applications so that from the user's perspective, there's only one app, and their requests will go to the new ASP.NET Core project. If that ASP.NET Core app isn't able to serve the requests, we proxy them back to the original ASP.NET app, which then can serve them. And so what this means is that you're able to have these two apps deployed side by side invisibly to the user. And over time, you can take individual controllers or pieces out of that ASP.NET app, move them over to ASP.NET Core, and as things appear in the ASP.NET Core app, users will start to use those, and eventually you'll have everything moved over.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Very
The latest
impressive.
preview even adds the ability to right-click on a controller in Visual Studio and say migrate, and it will copy the controller code over to the new project. It will change source code as best as it's able to make it match ASP.NET Core APIs, and then it will find all of the dependencies with static analysis that controller needs. It'll move those over as well. So we're sort of helping you to just one piece at a time move from ASP.NET to the more modern ASP.NET Core solution.
So
That's awesome.
I had a question for you. I don't know if you
Yeah.
know this, but I'm going to ask this of the audience too. So the people watching who are on WCF, feel free to type this into chat. But do you get a sense, are most users going to Core WCF as a sort of stopgap between their legacy code and they're looking to move to new platforms, or are people looking to stay on Core WCF? In other words, is it a destination or is it a pivot point for most customers?
Yeah. So my experience with customers is that, of course, it depends on the scenario. It depends on the customer. But the most common thing I see is that it's just a destination, because we now have an easy path from WCF to Core WCF. And once we get the tooling in place, it will be an even easier path. Once you're on Core WCF, you're able to run on .NET 6. You're able to run on Linux. From there, you can look at other communication frameworks as a next step, but we don't have an easy migration path for that at the moment. And so for a lot of customers, they just kind of move to Core WCF and they're there, maybe not permanently, but indefinitely, has been my experience.
So I'm wondering at this point, I realized as you were talking then, Mike, that maybe we step back a little bit, because there may be people who are coming to the stand-up who actually don't really know what WCF is and when you would use it and what it's used for. So can somebody just do maybe I know this is kind of putting you on the spot, but hopefully an ad hoc quick overview of what WCF is, maybe a little bit of history and what you might use it for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to hand that off to Matt, because he's the expert.
Yeah, so it's so flexible in a different. So I can just talk about some common scenarios. So one common scenario is interface-based contract first RPC scenarios. So you say, I've got an interface which represents some code which I want to run, but I need it to run in a different process, maybe on a different box. So you have your interface, you add a few attributes to decorate it, and then you implement it on the server side. And on the client side, you say, give me a channel which implements this interface. You configure your bindings for pick one which supports features you need. Like we can do callbacks, so you can have calls coming back from the server to the client. And then you just call the interface as if it was a local method call, and it gets remoted to remote server, and then it returns back. Like, it's not 100%. Like, exceptions come back slightly differently, so you have to have special thinking about that. And there's your data types have to be serializable, because if they're not, then you can't. But
so this
on the whole,
is basically this is kind of a remote procedure call type thing. Is this
yes?
So we're using SOAP under the covers here, or what's the technology involved in the building blocks, or is it all custom?
So it's SOAP with a sprinkling of custom on top of it. So it supports all the SOAP protocols, and looks like when you look at it on the wire, it's XML. But we have some bindings which then sprinkle proprietary stuff on, like NetTCP uses binary XML encoding, and so structurally it's exact same SOAP message with XML. And if you get an XML reader for it, you'll see exact same tokens if it was sent by text, but it uses a more compact proprietary format for being able to send it. So it's opt-in on the proprietary stuff.
So if you're looking at if I'm just coming to this as somebody who doesn't know anything and I'm on .NET, and I want to do some kind of RPC, when would I choose WCF to do this as opposed to something like gRPC?
So gRPC works well for non-complicated. Okay.
Both gRPC and WCF are contract-based systems. So you have to define what the API looks like and what the data is. gRPC does that through a proto file with protobufs. One of the advantages CoreWCF has is we're all in code. So you're defining your interface in C# and annotating it with attributes. The gRPC has the advantage that it is cross-platform. So there are implementations for Java, Golang, Rust, you name it, C++. There's an implementation there. So it's great for cross-platform work in a heterogeneous data center or non-heterogeneous data center where you've got like a lot of different services. The problem with it when it comes to .NET is out of the box, it's hard to take existing code and remote it because you have to translate everything to a protobuf.
Yeah.
There are some projects like protobuf.net that do a code-first approach, but those are dynamic using reflection, which isn't quite as fast, which isn't kind of as fast as having it predefined. So there's kind of pros and cons on both sides. The goal for the CoreWCF project is really more of a brownfield rather than greenfield story. We have a lot of people that have used WCF over the years because that's what we pointed them at.
Yep.
And they're now like, I want to port to .NET 6, and I've got millions of lines of code in this thing. So we're trying to make that as easy as possible, while also enabling you to go to Linux, enabling you to go to containers, and kind of modernizing at the same time, but reducing the amount of code that you have to rewrite. So your contracts generally can stay exactly the same. There's a little bit more details around the ceremony of setting that up.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely get all those advantages.
So some of the problems people have faced when they're trying to go from WCF to gRPC. So when you've got a tool you're trying to write a solution to, which is why gRPC is well suited to Greenfield, is you write your solution to the capabilities of the framework you're using. Yeah. And so if you're doing Greenfield, you can design your data structures in ways which work with gRPC, and you've got that in mind of its limitations and code it so that it works. But when you're doing if you're saying, okay, I've got an existing WCF service and you want to move to gRPC, then you haven't been designing things with those limitations in mind. And then so we had spoke with one team who they had a very large and complicated object model, which included inheritance in the object model. And gRPC cannot handle inheritance. So they'd have to go back to drawing board and redesign the whole API and change their entire object model across a massive code base. So moving to CoreWCF makes sense for them.
Even something like a relational database, right? People talk about swapping out their relational database. I did this once in 2001, I think, where it was like, well, we don't want to pay for Oracle anymore, so let's move it all to SQL Server. Well, it's not as simple as that, right? You've designed it to work with the Oracle features, not the SQL Server features. So, that can be a definite issue when you've designed something up front.
Matt, sorry, go ahead.
Particularly in an EF world where you're either producing your model in the database from that or your database into the model, you have the C# code there. So it's much easier to add the data contract attribute, data contract attributes on it, and then hey, I can just serialize it. Like WCF was originally great for if I could go back in the world to data sets and data table, you could just point at them and they would just be hydrated across perfectly. But it still works pretty well with modern EF
Yes,
model.
yes.
So I'm curious, Matt. So you mentioned inheritance, for example, as one feature that's that's well supported by WCF, but not very well supported in the gRPC world. Do you have like another example or two, just out of curiosity, where WCF is going to help you do something very easily that you cannot do in gRPC?
Another problematic point for gRPC is object graphs with loops. So
yes.
WCF by
We
default
love that.
doesn't handle WCF by default doesn't handle that automatically. There's a setting you can set up, but you just turn on this emit objects by reference, and
Yes.
then second time an object appears, all you do is reference its ID, and you break your.
It's very reminiscent of the same problem in JSON, right? Like where
JSON
you have loops,
serialization,
like
yeah,
you want to serialize the graph, and you've got loops, you've got the same kind of problems, and like by reference and so on. Interesting.
So we have this question from the community, which I think also kind of naturally stems from this conversation. So we've been talking, gRPC, we've been talking REST. Not REST. We've been talking SOAP. What about just having a web API? What about kind of going the REST route? Where would be the pros and cons of that?
Web API takes a little bit more work and thought if you've got a more complicated web object model on your request. Like it's you can do it, but then you're going to basically like pseudo SOAP, where you're taking your request and wrapping in an XML or JSON object.
You're pretending to be REST, but you're not really.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, RPC over REST, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But like if your use case and your data model works well with Web API, that's probably the best option for you.
Go ahead, Shai.
Yeah, I mean, just for completeness, right? If we're talking about all the various ways, you can interface to a server, right? So we're discussing WCF and we've discussed gRPC, which are maybe somewhat similar technologies, like kind of addressing the RPC kind of way of thinking. Then there's the REST kind of world, of course. And then just again, for completeness, we also have the more query-based approaches like OData and GraphQL, which might be weird in this context. It's not at all the same thing. These are maybe more around querying, concepts and mutating and something that maybe seems to resemble a database a bit more than an arbitrary RPC call. But you could also look at it in that way, right? That's another kind of alternative way of, I have a server, I want to expose an endpoint that I want to call in to get data back. That again, but once again, this is not an RPC style thing. You're not even pretending to just call a function on the server. Instead, you're formulating a query in some way, GraphQL or OData, and you're going to be sending that query and getting back that those results. It's again a different world, but it's up there in that universe, right?
I think that, to me, one of the things that stands out is that you have these kind of ways of doing somewhat simplified, maybe a little bit easier things. But if you want the full power of actually doing essentially what remote procedure, promises to you, or what SOAP promises to you, or in this case, what WCF is, being able to really communicate at a high level of complexity and detail between the two ends, then WCF is going to be a great choice for that, right?
Yeah.
So I have a question, because one of the things that comes up quite a bit is the appropriateness of different type of endpoint technology for the job at hand. So for example, for microservices talking to each other, we might not recommend REST, right? Because a fast on-the-wire protocol like gRPC or even WCF with certain types of serializers might make sense, whereas to the front end, that's more REST and GraphQL. What does the current landscape look like with customers using WCF? Are they mostly using it for back-end communication, or are they also exposing it to the front end and consuming it with client applications? And how does that impact kind of their strategy to move forward?
Great question.
So of the people who are using it and have spoken to, the majority of them are back-end communication, like two different back-end pieces communicating with each other. But there are some people who are using it for front-end usage. And generally, those people are sticking to moving to CoreWCF because they had third-party customers and they fixed a wire protocol, and moving to gRPC is not an option because
absolutely.
they don't control the clients.
Yeah. And these are the traditional kind of, here's your SOAP envelope and here's your security credentials and here's how you securely connect to our exposed endpoint and consume the data. Are you seeing most of them using it as a secure way to connect externally, or is it kind of open-ended APIs as well that anyone can connect to?
I've seen some open-ended ones. I mentioned there's a company who ported WebHTTP binding because they're exposing a REST endpoint publicly, so they can't change it. But their difficulty wasn't in can they move to Web API. It was in how expensive is it to move to Web API, because they had all their extensibility points being used in WCF, and it's not a one-to-one simple mapping. So like just the amount of work. I presume they just have a lot of endpoints, and so it's just a lot of work to be able to port over. But yeah, there are some, but I'd say the majority of people I've spoken to are doing internal stuff because they're using NetTCP, and they own both ends.
There's quite a lot of using it from WinForms and WPF clients to the server. So you own both ends. It's just the easiest way to communicate across those.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We've been doing we've been doing a bunch of customer interviews recently, and it's fascinating what our customers are doing with it. Generally, these are long running, but we have manufacturing, nuclear scientists, all sorts of people.
Oh dear! I always get stressed when I hear a piece of software of mine is, in that kind of environment.
That sounds like something on the front page, though. WCF, suitable for nuclear science.
I mean, I get worried when you're in a meeting and it's like some big banking customer or something, but at least that's only financial meltdown.
There are those as well. Admittedly, the nuclear scientist was more of a testing and testing.
I remember when this was quite some time ago, but Rowan Miller used to be a PM. Many of you may remember on the EF team. We went out to work with SpaceX because they were using Entity Framework, and we were like, wait, they're putting it on their rockets. It's like, no, they're just using it internally in their infrastructure on the ground. It's not going in the rockets, don't worry.
Good. Yes.
I probably shouldn't have said that, should I? Hopefully I'm not going to get sued. But anyway.
I did have another one question, though I know you guys have your demos. Maybe we'll switch to that soon again. But I'm so curious. You did say at some point that that CoreWCF is a port of the server side components of WCF. So I was kind of wondering what's the story here for client side. So in .NET, if I want to connect to a WCF server running CoreWCF or not, what's my story there?
So we have some packages in it's in the .NET WCF repo. So they're prefixed with system service model as the name of packages, and those are API compatible and actually binary compatible with .NET Framework. So you can actually take a library compiled against .NET Framework, use it in .NET, and if it references service model dealer, we have a shim in there. And as long as you're not using APIs, which we don't have support for yet, it will type forward to our .NET implementation and just work. Contrasting with CoreWCF, because we rebuilt on top of ASP.NET Core, some of the API shapes have had to be changed. So there's and we had to do a namespace change because in .NET Framework, you got one class handles the server and the client, so that class exists in the client side. So to add the server side implementation in the same namespace, same name class, you can't do it. So we had to switch to a different namespace, and so we've kept all the APIs that like 99.9% of people will be touching. They are the same shape, just in different namespace. So if you got a message inspector, you should just be able to switch your namespace to CoreWCF from system service model, and it should behave exactly the same. So yeah, that's where the client is and what the difference is between them and how you have to use them.
I mean, I think there's a general thing here that we get asked over the years quite a lot, and that is, well, why don't you just make everything backwards compatible with .NET Framework? Everything just work. And in the early days of ASP.NET Core and EF Core, which was Project K back in the day, I mean, that was discussed a lot. But the part of the point was, if we do that, we're still stuck where we are with the .NET Framework largely. We want to have the ability also to make things better, so you get much better experience. And if you look at some of the perf improvements on .NET 6, for example, I mean, all through the .NET releases, the Core and the .NET releases, like you were saying, ASP.NET Core is not just ASP.NET running on modern .NET. It's different because it's better. So it's always this challenging balance. That I think is somewhat hard to grasp if you haven't had the opportunity to work on one of these kind of big platforms. The balance between bringing existing people and not breaking everything, but at the same time moving forward and evolving, getting faster, remaining relevant, adopting new stuff as well. It's a very challenging thing to do, but we do try and balance those things, right?
Yeah, and a straight port of WCF to .NET Framework, at least when we started, just wasn't possible. So we used to joke that WCF was a canary for the rest of the world, because I picked up perf and functional regressions in Windows through our testing in WCF.
Yeah.
Picked up the same in the actual .NET Framework over the years. And so, we rely on pretty much every part of .NET Framework except the UI pieces, WinForms, and pretty much everything else we touch in some way or another. And so when we went from .NET Framework to .NET Core at the time, and we had 50% of our world we relied on ripped out from underneath us, you just can't do a straight port.
Yeah.
That must have been fun.
It was, especially on the client side, getting it to run on UWP when they didn't even provide us a socket class.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I remember something about that. Yeah, that caused
I've got a book on my shelf that explains how to implement sockets from scratch in C. If
that, Jeremy, come on.
It was such. We ended up using UWP sockets APIs, and then there was a whole bunch of creative thinking had to go around that at the time.
So since we're talking about the low level stuff, UDP binding.
Yes, I saw that. That's interesting. So as of right now, all our communication is being handled by ASP.NET Core. So even for NetTCP, they've got a raw sockets layer. So we just simply say, listen on this port, and let us know when the connection comes in, and then we start reading and writing from that connection. We don't even see a socket. We get an iDuplex pipe, and we read and write via a pipe reader and pipe writer. But we are going to have to start branching with the queue stuff. We're going to have our own I/O layer. So we're not going to be hooking to ASP.NET cores. With that, it's going to be pulling from a queue system. We're making it agnostic to the queue technology. So it's not going to be MSMQ specific. It will work with any flavor queue service that you want to provide the implementation for.
Sounds good.
And so we're working on hooking into the ASP.NET Core product in a way where they'll start up our piece which reads and passes stuff along. And so once we've kind of got that stuff smoothed out and kind of got a model and pattern of how to do that, then the UDP binding should be relatively simple from that. We'll need to own our own sockets code, but that code will basically be listen on the socket, message comes in, punt it down the line.
Right.
So it's not going to be a lot of code and a lot of work to do. It's just working out the exact pattern of how we want to model things so that we can add more stuff more easily.
Yeah.
Matt, can you help us understand why would someone want to use UDP binding?
I was about to ask the same thing.
So There are
Masochists?
several reasons. There are some really, really good reasons for this. When you start layering some of the SOAP protocols on top of it, it does kind of border on the ridiculous. But we have reliable UDP binding. Yeah, but the
Reliable,
we-
unreliable. I love it.
Yeah.
yeah. So like we expect acknowledgement back, and then if we don't hear it, we'll resend it, and we guarantee only once delivery of the message up the line to this service implementation.
Sounds like
truly-
an implementation of a TCP stack over there.
yeah, it's it was like quick before quick was quick.
Yes.
But a lot more heavyweight than quick because it does that over SOAP messages. But the one of the really useful use cases on it is multicast. So you can send out a single message and it can get received by a whole bunch of different machines. And if you layer on the reliable stuff, you can guarantee they all got it as well.
Wow.
But
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So would MQTT be a more modern replacement for that, or
doesn't that use HTTP to send messages?
I think it's also. I think there's also broadcast options in there.
I don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
But MQTT has message size limitations, which isn't it a lot smaller than 64K, which is your limit on UDP? Well, actually, we can actually handle UDP bigger than that because you've got multi-packets reassembly over UDP, so we can actually. It just means
Because
that
you've
you're more likely
implemented
to lose it.
TCP on top of it, so you can have
Well, that's not the SOAP layer. That's actually a feature of UDP is you can actually do multi-packet UDP.
Right.
Just the more packets it's split over, the higher chance there is of it
losing something. And
losing something. But I think MQTT is very limited to small messages.
I just love that the UDP packet size is the maximum memory on the first computer that I worked on. So 64K. And
You're
that's
at
just
64K? Wow.
Yeah, today that's
impressive.
just well, actually the first one was technically 32K, but the first
there
one
you
that
go.
counted anyway. But so I have a question just for completeness, and if it's not relevant or too tangential, just stop me. But because I'm assuming most people watching this are interested in either porting core to core WCF or doing something right with their WCF, do you work at all with the API management in Azure? I know it has some translation endpoints for WCF, and I'm just curious if you're familiar with that or if you have any customers using that, and if not, totally fine, just tangent. I guess.
I've never worked with it. I know. So authentication would probably be a tricky thing with that.
Sure.
Because SOAP calls generally tend to get authenticated in more complex ways than that. But if you were to use that, it would only work with HTTP. But then it would just be you just be opaque. It's like I have an HTTP request, and it just happens to go. It's like going through a proxy server before you get to your service.
So there's basically a very thin set of rails on either side of the scenario that you would even want to consider that. You'd have to be using WCF, using it HTTP and so forth. And so what you're saying, because obviously we're not going to translate TCP or anything else directly over the Azure endpoint. Okay, good. It was more curiosity for completeness then.
Okay, one more customer question that I want to bring up here. And so we're all going to love it. Did Meth ever make it to .NET Core?
I think it did. And now I have to think about this. I remember working with a customer a year or so ago, and I had to go research this, and because I had no idea. And there's like Meth version 1 and Meth version 2, and I think the long story was eventually, yes, they did both make it to .NET Core, but now I have to go look up like links to justify to like back that up. But I do remember running into this with some customers in the past, and we got it working. But I'm gonna have to go do some research to dig up more details.
I have to say, I feel like I ran into a project not too long ago where I was surprised to see Meth underneath the hood too. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, that's the Managed Extensibility Framework, which, in my opinion, was a phenomenal dependency injection solution. I know that is controversial and so forth, but it was a different way of looking at how you do dependency injection. Very modular approach, and I have to say it, right, because it's my favorite thing to say on forums like this. It was great for Silverlight.
Okay. My experience of Meth has been very much having people say to me, Meth is awesome, like it does another thing, and then walking past people's office and hearing them go, Meth! So, like, I don't know myself, but I've seen both sides of the table.
Meth is, I always consider Meth to be somewhat kind of like zombieism. Like once an architect catches Methitis, you just have to shoot them because they
in the head.
Whatever problem it is, Meth is the solution.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. So I just found notes I made for myself 4 years ago when we had to deal with this for the customer, and my findings were that yes, Meth does work on .NET Core. I pasted in our internal chat here some links to packages if we want to
we can
somehow forward them along to other chats.
Yeah, we can do that.
So you can look at the Microsoft composition package as well as system component model composition, both of which work on .NET. So if you're using Meth, stay away from Sam, but you can use .NET 6.
Do you know if Meth's been updated to use the new assembly load context stuff? Because it seems that something like that really should, like, assembly load context is a must for that sort of scenario, so you can unload stuff.
I do not know. That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, that was the real benefit, right? Is when you were building modular applications and wanted discovery of plugins or just to load things for a low memory footprint. So
yeah.
Curious to see if it's ported today to kind of keep the lights on, or if there's actual greenfield use of it.
I'm not enough of them.
No, I'm not asking
Anecdotally,
this
I
thing.
haven't heard of anything. So I mean, my guess is that there's not a lot of investment happening.
If you're listening to this or watching this and you're using Meth in Greenfield, let us know. Not sure we'll do anything, but let us know. So
maybe send them a condolences card.
Like I said, like some people love Meth, right? I mean, so
So it'd be sorry with a bracket export on top, and then
So
that's a good point. Somebody was saying, is it not used in VS? It certainly used to be. So
it still is.
But
VS,
VS, of course,
that's how VS does all of it.
Framework.
Yeah, exactly. VS is on .NET
Framework.
Unfortunately, VS is not the prime example of something using modern technologies and up to date with everything and so on. But
yes, let's not go.
Also uses
did you guys? So I want to ask, did you guys want to show more demo stuff? Because it seems like we've hijacked this into our questions.
I've got a short demo of just using Upgrade Assistant to move from WCF to CoreWCF on .NET 6, which we can do if there's time. But I mean, the conversation is great, so
I think
let's do it. Let's do that. And if people have additional questions, ask them in chat, and we'll come back after and answer any more questions that people have.
Yeah.
So you want me to add you? I'll add your.
Yeah, please do.
There you go.
Yep. Yeah, so I thought in order to help people understand what it looks like moving from WCF on .NET Framework to CoreWCF on .NET 6, we can sort of go through the experience right now with the work in progress Upgrade Assistant stuff that Simona's been adding. And so, let me demo that real quick. So I've got a project, just a sample app that I made that uses WCF. This is call it the Bean Trader server, because it allows users to connect, and I have this service they connect to over Net TCP Binding, where they can offer to trade different colors of beans, and other users can say, I want to trade my red beans for your blue beans or whatever. And so there's a few APIs on here. If we look at the interface, the interface is just, you can listen for trade offers, and it'll notify you. We've got a duplex binding here. You can offer a trade, you can accept a trade, you can cancel one of yours, and so on. And so this is all just built. It's a very simple WCF example on .NET Framework. I've got a WPF front end that uses it. And basically, we're just sort of creating our service host here. We have, sorry, not packages config. If we look at the app config.
Packages config.
Yeah, you can tell this is an old app.
Yes.
But we've set up this net TCP binding, which is how the client is going to communicate with this server to make or accept trade offers or whatever. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I don't know what else there's to really say about this. Just creating the service host and using it. So let's go ahead and run Upgrade Assistant on this project to move it to target .NET 6 instead. And so
we would just like to say you have a comment in there saying transport message credentials not supported yet. It is supported in CoreWCF and in WCF client.
Yeah, this is super old. I bet if I go to this issue, it's long since closed. So
issue number 8, it should be by now, right?
Yeah, yeah, we're definitely up to something higher than 8.
I don't know. Some stuff is really like full message security's got a low number. I think
that's true. Some of them do hang around a while.
Close like this week on EF Core Repo issue number 214, and we're up to what 50,000 or something like that now. I don't know. But,
oh wow!
Yeah, the early ones are usually the painful ones.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
We should get like a bottle of champagne for every 3-digit something like that. Like the 3 digits are really Anyway.
So Upgrade Assistant is a command line tool. Here I'm using an internal build, so I'm just using the exe directly. In the real world, you would install it as a .NET CLI tool, which is called Upgrade Assistant. So you do like a .NET tool install upgrade-assistant, then you just run it with that name. But we use the upgrade command, and then we point it at a project, and it will walk us through these different steps that are necessary to take it to .NET 6. So I'll give this a minute here to start up. And then we'll run.
I got
through
a couple
it.
of thoughts afterwards for the about the Upgrade Assistant.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
No, just yeah.
All right. Well, it's being slow today. Come on.
Well, whenever you're streaming, things are always.
Jeremy
always has a thing where we're all supposed to like move our mice around in a circle or something, and that makes it go faster.
I'll have to try the little mouse dance to speed things up.
Exactly.
So the way Upgrade Assistant works is it gives you this list of things that's going to be changing. It's going to go through one at a time to see if these apply, and so on. We start with something as simple as backing up the project, converting to an SDK style project. We're going to clean up the NuGet packages, update to the .NET 6 TFM. We're then going to update the NuGet packages based on that new target framework. We'll update our config files, update source code if there's anything changes. And then the new one that sort of just showed up here with this preview that I'm using is that it updates the WCF service to CoreWCF, which is really the interesting one. So I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly. I've got a lot of videos where I demo Upgrade Assistant, so we can look at that more another time.
So these steps have been generated based on your specific project, obviously, right? It looked at your project, it saw, hey, there's WCF here, so I'm going to add that 9th step there, right, as an option.
Yes. And there are steps that aren't here that would apply if it was a WinForms project or a web app or whatever the case may be.
Makes sense.
So yeah, it tries to filter the steps based on. So like even here we see that like we had a system service model reference. It starts by pulling that out and putting in initially the .NET 6 service model packages, which is what you would need for like client side WCF work. Eventually, when we get to our new step, it's going to replace those even with CoreWCF once it recognizes the server dependency. But just kind of going through these, and eventually this is going to start going quick because we're going to get to a point where there's these changes, even though they apply to this type of a project, there's nothing that actually has to happen. So they'll just sort of like all go to green right away, and we'll skip down to the end. Although if we do come over and look at the project, you can see already just sort of starting with this. I'll reload it here. If I double click on this, you can see that we've got an SDK style project. We've started updating our references, and they're now package reference. We're using some of these, system service model packages instead of, just the .NET framework reference. But here we're to a point where we're actually going to update the target framework. So I just applied I'm about to apply the target framework change. So that'll actually retarget it from .NET Framework to .NET 6. Once we do that one, and then, okay, cool. So just finishing removing packages. And we do have some work items to consolidate some of these steps, because I know there's a lot to go through, but we sort of started out with just sort of like doing every step individually, because we had this idea that we wanted users to know what was changing in their project. But I think we're to a point now where maybe we have too many. We need to rein in a little bit and just kind of have the top level ones. But anyhow, that's some future direction for Upgrade Assistant. So now we're to a point where, okay, we've given you the new SDK style project. We've updated the packages to sort of match that model, but we're still targeting .NET Framework. So now with this next step, what we're going to do is we're going to replace that with .NET 6. So now is when things are going to start breaking. And so the rest of this is going to be kind of cleaning that up. So there's a few things that'll happen here. Kind of going through some of these, seeing if anything needs to happen. Most of these didn't apply. The one that's interesting is we do go in and clean up the configuration file, because it may have sections that don't work on .NET 6. So we clean those up. And then we're going to look at the source code and see if anything there needs changing. In this case, I don't think there's any source code changes that are needed. So we'll come finally to the WCF to CoreWCF step, which is going to be the most interesting one for these purposes. So let's see. Okay, it actually is going to warn me that I'm using WCF. We probably can remove this now, but there's a warning that it gives saying that, oh, you're using WCF. You may want to consider CoreWCF or gRPC instead. Now that we have a way to sort of automatically move people forward, we can probably get rid of that message. But the last step here is the interesting one. Okay, so I applied update WCF service to CoreWCF. You see some of the steps it went through. So it updated our config files, updated source, updating using directives. And so if we come back over to our project, it's going to look fairly different. In here, you can see in the project file, we've added some CoreWCF references, including CoreWCF Configuration Manager, which lets us load CoreWCF configuration from a XML config file the same way you would have in .NET Framework, because remember, that's how I was setting up my binding, and we want to reuse that as much as possible. So in here, we've commented out parts of the configuration that aren't supported on .NET 6, but the actual definition of the net TCP binding, my outdated comment, all of this stuff just kind of like came over directly because we're able to use that.
Nice.
And then if we come back to the program.cs, this has changed a little bit. So what we're doing here is now we're actually creating a Kestrel web host. So we're creating like an ASP.NET Core web host. And I want to be clear that it's not like an old style ASP.NET app where this has to now run in IIS or anything like that. It's just using Kestrel in process as what's going to be the host that's, receiving the connections from clients. And so in here, we're using some of these APIs that Matt talked about, where we're, using NetTCP, and this is the port we're listening on. We're adding services to the ASP.NET Core DI container, so that is going to set up kind of the CoreWCF services that we're going to use. And then we're also configuring this optional bit, which sets up loading configuration from this config file, since that's where a lot of stuff happened before. I previously had configured my service host, so we now move that code down inside of this app.use service model call that we're calling on the web application. And we're taking, this is the exact same code that goes in, gets my service host, and then, sets up some of the auth stuff for it and so on. And then ultimately we just call start async on the, probably should be in a wait.
So this is very idiomatic of a typical modern .NET application, like an ASP.NET Core application.
Yeah, it is. It's using the web host builder, registering stuff with DI, starting up the app, registering middleware and stuff. And that's all sort of the ASP.NET Core way. But what we're registering is the services that will be able to receive and respond to WCF requests.
Very
and
cool.
So we're able to reuse the part I didn't show before that, if we were to dig into this service, this code hasn't changed at all, which is really the benefit of CoreWCF.
Right.
I mean, you
Of
have to
course.
change how you start it up, and that's what Upgrade Assistant is trying to help with.
Yeah.
but the service itself, the interfaces, those are all identical, moving from .NET Framework to .NET 6, which is the big win compared to going to something like gRPC, where this would all be a rewrite.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, we're out of time, but I'll launch this and we can... Let's build errors. All right, well, maybe I won't launch.
We traditionally run over on this stand-up every time. So.
Yeah, take your time.
Added something here.
Mike, how much of this was Simona's internship work?
So Simona's internship work was creating that upgrade assistant step that I showed that actually was responsible for updating my program.cs so that the parts of WCF that changed, how you bootstrap your service host, how you configure things, that's all now handled by the code that Simona wrote. So
very cool.
yeah, so it's really cool.
I think we missed having you introduce yourself, Simona, in the beginning.
Yeah, I think she joined late.
Do you wanna? I didn't even realize you were an intern.
Yeah, of course.
We've got some feedback.
Yep. Sorry, I was in the same room with Hong. So hi everyone, I'm Simona. I'm a summer intern in Hong's team, and I've been working very closely with Matt, Sam, and also Mike on creating this extension to Upgrade Assistant, adding WCF to CoreWCF migration.
Yeah. That's very cool.
So thank you, Mike, for doing this great demo.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually occurred to me last night, really, you should have done this, but like I wasn't going to tell you last night at like 7 p.m. Like, hey, guess what, Simona? I want you to demo it, but yeah, it's really cool stuff. So,
oh, good stuff.
Yeah, I can go ahead and prove it's working. I've got the app started up.
Sure.
To finish it off.
If you want to play with fire, then you go for it.
Yeah. Let's just
live demo. It's
living on the edge.
And we're going to see if this actually works or not. But if we go out to the client, which is still running on .NET Framework, I haven't ported this part yet. Although that's an easier migration since the WCF client stuff's actually supported in box with .NET 6. But we should be able to just launch our client.
I give you 23% that it works.
Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. All right,
so I'm see
myself a name, and you can see here it's connected, so it's working. So this is that Beam Trader service running on .NET 6, saying, okay, some guy connected. Come in here and make a new trade. I'll offer 10 of my red beans for 2 of your green beans.
There's got to be an NFT joke in here somewhere.
This sample's too old for that, but now we need to update it. But then maybe we'll sign out. We'll come back as someone
maybe
else.
Your auto migration tool can upgrade your sample to be more up with the times.
Yeah. So this guy will say, I'll take those 10 red beans, and it's like cool. And so and back here you can see the logging. It's all going back to that back end. Running on .NET 6 with CoreWCF. So
very cool.
There we go.
Good stuff. Okay, so we didn't really get any more questions in. We did have this one, which what is WCF? So this gives me an opportunity to say this is available on YouTube. So go look back. We did talk quite a bit about what WCF is earlier in the session. But other than that, thank you everybody. It's not often we have this many people on the stream, so that's awesome. And I guess next time in a couple of weeks. Oh, Shai, you had some questions or some comments on the upgrade.
Some rambling maybe, but because we still have a bit of time, so we had this question of the upgrade assistant and EF Core at some point. That's a conversation that sometimes comes up, and we sometimes have this used to happen more than it does today. But we had users moving from the old EF6 non-core wanting to move to EF Core, and then oh my God, nothing is working, or help me automatically convert everything so that it just magically works. A little bit like the kind of experience that we saw just now with CoreWCF. And unfortunately, so I don't know if there is. I actually have no idea. I wanted to ask Arthur and Mike if there is some sort of experience for moving from EF6 to EF Core. To my knowledge, there isn't. Or am I wrong?
Not yet. I know it's something people have thought about. I don't know if Arthur has any more, insight into that.
I will defer to Jeremy on this because he's written. So Jeremy's written a document which describes the things to do. I think I'll let Jeremy talk, but I think one of the main challenges is that some of the changes are not just API, they're behavioral. And so it's very hard to know that, the behavior is slightly different on EF Core than it is on Entity Framework. And that, as we talked about earlier, was intentional. There was a lot of behaviors on the old Entity Framework that were there from a long time ago that we knew were not good, and we wanted to make them better. So it's a little bit challenging to do that. Jeremy, do you have other thoughts on that? If Jeremy can unmute himself.
Yeah, it's a very small target for a hand that's going all over the place.
Yes.
But yeah, so 3 thoughts on that. First thought is that, yes, the fundamental logic involved in the migration seems difficult to completely automate, especially when we look at like the DMX model. How do we turn that into a fluently configured code model? Or are we looking at the database? So there's those points. But the second point that I'd like to make is I do think there's opportunity to participate in the upgrade assistant, and I'm very interested in engaging in dialogue around ways that we can look at pointing people to the right document that provides the porting guidance, like to have a step in there that says, hey, we recognize that you have EF6. There is a way to move forward. We're not going to automate it, but here's where it is. So that is something I want to pursue. And then the last thing is, we also have this issue where the old portability analyzer was erroneously reporting EF Core as not compatible for certain versions of .NET. So we probably should address those as well. But I don't believe, and I could be wrong, right? There may be some people way more clever than I am who come up with a way to automate it. But I do think there's a way to at least acknowledge it and provide some better guidance to users when they run it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that would be pretty easy to do, and that's something we should get added to upgrade
I
assistant.
like it. You've heard it right here. Easy to do.
I think the other thing that's really worth pointing out here, though, is that EF6, as in the old version of Entity Framework, runs on modern.NET. So you can, and it's interesting hearing Matt's story, because years and years ago, right at the beginning of Project K, when the idea was dump loads and loads of the APIs out of .NET Framework and not bring them across, I actually started trying to port the old stack to what has become Core, and said it's not possible. But we kind of, I don't think we're as bad as WCF in the amount of stuff we use, because by the time we got to 3, I think, between 2 and 3, .NET Core 2 and 3, we'd added back a bunch of those things to make it easier for people to port things. And at that point, we were able to then port EF6 to basically run on .NET Core. And so while we definitely recommend the EF Core, it's faster, it's got a lot more features, it's more modern and all of the good stuff. If you have an existing application that uses EF6 and all you want to do is bring it forward and move it onto Core, onto modern.NET, you can do it without changing from EF6 to EF Core, and I think that's a very valuable kind of step also in how we're talking about you don't want to move everything. So if you're focusing on, okay, I want to move my ASP.NET Core app or my WCF app, but I've got some EF stuff in there, well, forget about EF initially. Just use EF6 in the new stuff, and then if later you want, I want to take advantage of this new stuff, then you can tackle that as kind of a separate thing.
And that's a really good point. Is like, don't try to bite off everything at once in a migration project, because you'll just you'll be years in and kind of like those big institutional projects that are just like, we're 10 years late and $2 billion over. No, go incrementally, step by step.
Yes.
And that idea has actually driven some of the earlier development of CoreWCF. So the 1.x version actually runs on .NET Framework. And so the idea is someone's wanting to look to see if they can port across, and are trying to, they got a checklist of, is this going to work? Is this going to work? They can port to CoreWCF, leaving the rest of the implementation exactly as is, and validate that their communication layer is still working and the same, and support that the clients can still communicate with it. And when they're happy with that, then they can actually go and start porting the actual implementation across. Okay.
is that it? Shall we end there? Seems like a good place. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time on this, and yeah, we'll be out with in a couple of weeks, probably with aggregate functions. Shai's gonna take us through that stuff. So yeah, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time. And remember to keep
Thank
it
you
sergeant.
so much for hosting us.
Thanks,
Now
everyone.
Jeremy has to find the button to actually end the.
Do I have
end
to
the
do
meeting.
a magic button?
You have to find